Hello everyone. Emily here of Emmy Bean Jewelry. And it's time finally for my second video. I had no idea that my small bezel making video was going to just have such a big response. And I appreciate that. Thank you. And so finally, 2 years later, I have come up with a list of a few more videos I'd like to try. It has been a bit of a challenge to come up with time with my jewelry making schedule, my studio, doing shows, and my family to make a few more videos, but I've finally put it into my schedule, so hopefully I can have some regular content coming. Today we are going to tackle setting a stone with corners into a bezel, not just making the bezel, but setting it properly as well, so you don't get those folded or buckled corners that seem to be the bane of our existence as jewelers. Everyone loves these angular stones, but they can be a pain in the butt to set. There is a proper way to do it. It goes against all instinct, but as long as you follow the method, I promise you it will work. So what you're going to need to start out, and I'm going to have this down at the bottom too for your list of materials so you can follow along, you are going to need a gemstone with corners. Doesn't matter what kind of corners. I happen to pick a square boulder opal, but if you have something that's triangular, that would work. The fine silver bezel wire that meets the height requirement for your gemstone. And this one is actually 1/4 inch because this is a really tall boulder opal. We are going to need a Sharpie or a permanent marker of choice. A real big thing is a pair of pliers that have flat edges and no serrations in there. They are just flat. These are my good old trusty ones. I've had these for years. I have no idea where I got them from, but if something happened to them, I would probably cry. And for me, I cut my bezel wire with these scissors. It's just a pair of cheap scissors. I'm pretty sure I picked them up at Harbor Freight a good many years ago, but all I use them for is cutting bezel wire. So here we go. We're going to start out. First thing I do is I use my fingers and just flatten it out a bit. Because it is on a roll, it can get a little bended. So what we're going to do here, and I apologize for the camera shaking, I'm wearing it on some contraption around my neck just to try to get it at an angle so that you're seeing it the way I see it. So we are going to line up pliers and bend. Just like that. Did I overbend? Yeah, I did. It's okay. We're going to do that as our starting point. Because remember, you never, ever, ever have your bezel start and end at a corner. Never. What that'll do, it will make it a very, very sharp corner. It will also be next to impossible to bend over. And it'll just stand out like a sore thumb. So, pick a corner, line it up, get it to that shape. Are we good? Yeah, we're good. Here's the trick. Go in with your pliers against your gemstone onto your bezel wire. Just cozy it right up there. Pick it up. Make sure it's lined up. Use your fingers and fold. And we do it again. We repeat this all the way around wherever you have a corner. Cozy it up, pick it up, and fold. If for some reason it doesn't pick up or the wire slips out, that's fine. Just go back in there, line it up, do it again. Cozy it up, pick it up, straighten out if you need to, and fold. That's it. You just created a bezel with corners. So, what we're going to do then is go in and mark it with our permanent marker. We are going to cut it. And I just cut that at a strange angle. Trying to look for my viewfinder here instead of in person. Alright. Now here's where you do the back and forth, up and down, trying to get it lined up. Then you go in with your pliers again. You want to flatten that because you want to get that lined up as much as possible. Then run your finger over it. Is your finger catching on any of that bezel that's sticking up? No? Alright, you're good to go. Next, we are going to solder. So I have some hard solder here. I'm going to pick out a few of these tiny bits. Now these solder cups holders are old film canisters. For those of you that remember cameras that took actual film. Back in college, I've had these ever since after taking a few photography classes, and it's one of those just random materials that my parents always saved. Whenever we went through another roll of film, they got the film developed, but we saved that canister because you never know what you needed it for. And wouldn't you know, it's fantastic for holding solder. Alright, solder underneath. Remember, put solder underneath and the heat will make it flow up that seam. Have my torch, which has not been behaving lately. And this is just butane. For a lot of my smaller pieces, I just bust out my butane torch because it just makes it easier. Alright, saw it sink, solder flowed up. There we go. I grab my copper tongs. So we are going to quench this and pickle it. And then we should be back for the next step. Okay, now time to check on that bezel. See how well it's pickled. I'm going to neutralize and then dry it off. Okay. So now it is time to fit that stone back in there. And unless you have a very irregular shape, sometimes it can be of a trick to see which side goes where for that bezel. Alright, there we go. We've got a really good snug fit there. Now, I remember which way the bezel is for up and down because you can see a little like solder blob down there. That's how you know it started at the bottom and you drew that solder up. Now, the next question is, which way do I want to set this stone for it to be finished? When I have it going this direction, there's a little bit of red flash up there. So I am going to set it that way. What I'm going to do next is I am going to take the stone out and file the bottom of my bezel. To do this, I have my drawer here and I have my 500 grit sandpaper. I'm going to take a look and see. Is it even? Not yet. You want to make sure that entire edge at the bottom is perfectly level. That way when you flow your solder, you're not going to have any gaps between the bezel and the backplate. Because nothing is more frustrating Then when you think you have it flowed perfectly, and it decides that that is not the case. All right, now I don't know if you can see, that is nice and even all the way around. All right. Next is we are going to prepare our backplate. What we're going to do with this is I'm going to use some sterling silver. What I like to do is I place my piece on my big sheet, and I like to make sure I have a nice border all the way around. I'm going to mark it. I tend to do dots instead of a straight line because I cannot draw a straight line to save my life. And then we are going to cut this with my saw. The saw I've been using for the last year and a half now, maybe pushing 2 years, is this one from Green Lion. I absolutely adore it. Because it has the larger grip, it's a lot easier on my hands. This is in no way sponsored by Green Lion. I just really, really, really love this saw. Okay. The next step that I like to do is I have a maker stamp, and I am going to put my stamp on the back of this because it needs to be done before soldering of the bezel. Okay, and then just to make sure it's perfectly flat, I use a urethane hammer, and I take that piece of silver. I use the side of my sledgehammer, and I just use the urethane hammer and just make sure it's flat by just tapping on it. Because sometimes doing my maker stamp, because I have to hit it 3 times to make sure it fully impresses, it can make the silver buckle ever so slightly. Alright, next step is we are going to solder. So, I need to make sure I have my bezel lined up exactly where I need it to be positioned. And a big trick I like to share is your solder seam, make sure that's always away from your flame, if at all possible. Because if that is fully exposed to the flame, there's a chance it could reopen. And that's just, you don't want to have to deal with that. You soldered it once, let's leave it soldered. Alright, here I've got my medium solder. Because we've got a good amount of room in here that it needs to get soldered down, I'm going to put 2 large pieces in there. And then I'm going to flux this. Rearrange it to make sure everything sits where it's supposed to. Then we are going to solder. When soldering, remember circles. Go ahead doing circles. You don't want to stay in one spot for too long. The silver could melt. And because you're working with silver, you need to make sure that it gets up to temperature for the entire piece in order for the solder to flow. And once you see that solder melt, it flows via capillary action. So as soon as it starts running along that bottom seam, it'll all start going. And solder goes where the heat is. So if you continue going around in circles, you know the solder is going to be flowed all the way around. Once you have visible proof that solder has flowed completely, turn off your torch and wait about 10 seconds or so before you quench that piece. Quenching it way too fast could cause the silver to crack, and we don't want that. Alright, after that pickles, we'll go on to the next step. Okay, so the piece is out of the pickle. Here it is. Now I'm going to use my tin snips and snip off the majority of the extra silver, file the edges, and then we are going to set this stone. Is this polished yet? No, not in the slightest. That's okay. If anything, I might throw a bail on here real quick before I set the stone, just so that way it can be a finished piece instead of having to take it out and do it all over again. So, here we go. Okay, tin snips made short work of cleaning up those edges. Now to file. I'm going to be doing this part off camera because I know not everyone can withstand those filing noises. So I'll be back once this is all filed. So, real quick scene change here. I am going to quick solder on that bail. I already have it all set up with my third hand and a piece of solder. Now to flux it. Alright, here we go. And this is easy solder that I'm using, since we used hard on the bezel and medium to do the bezel to the back plate. Remember, solder goes where the heat is. Just make sure to go all around there. Alright. I'm going to quench my third hand. Then I'm going to take this, quench it, and pickle it. Next step, I am going to file down the edges. Because that is a very loud process, I am going to do that off camera. And then I will be back and we are going to get into setting the stone. Alright, so I have this all filed and pre-polished. Typically I tumble my pieces before I set the stones, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to do that today. So right now you need to gather your gemstone. You need to gather all of your bezel pushing tools, your scraper, if you use one. I like to. And we are going to work on getting this done. So first thing I'm going to do is, because of this being handled, some of the bezel has kind of gotten pushed in. So what I do is I like to lay it down on my bench pin and flatten those edges out. There we go. Now, next what I'm going to do is I am going to put the stone next to the bezel like this to see where's it going to sit. Is it going to be too high? Like the bezel itself, is it going to be too tall? Is it going to be too short? Is it going to be just right? I think it could stand to be filed a little bit. So I'm actually just going to sand it with some 500 grit paper. Filing itself can take the bezel down too far too fast. If you sand it with some 500 grit paper, you have a little bit more control over how much is getting off of there. So I'm going to use my little bench brush and just sweep the little filings off of there. One trick that I know a lot of people use is they take some dental floss, and this is the one that gets kept studio only, and we're going to use this to test the fit of, well, not just the fit of the gemstone. We are going to do this in order to test the height of the bezel. So we are going to push it in there, and we can see it's a little high over on that side, a little lower on this side. We need to do some more filing. So let's pull on our dental floss and pop our gemstone out. Get some more filing done. I should say sanding, not filing. Alright, time to go back in with my brush. And because now it's going to be at a pretty good height, I did not go back in with the dental floss, and that's okay. Now, it is a little high still over on this side, not so much on this side. That's okay. We are going to tackle that with tools. So, I'm going to go in and file or sand this part down just where it needs to be, and I'll be right back. Okay, I went in by hand and did some filing on the sides that were a little bit taller than the rest. So, here is the big thing. We are going to go in and set this. Now, I know everyone's common instinct is to set it so you push toward the corners, but that's not the way to do it. Here's what we're going to do. Each corner, you're going to push directly in on that corner first, which seems absolutely crazy. All right, but sorry about really, that, folks. Really, that's camera trouble. The way to do it. The other one died on me with very little warning, so I'm going to continue here. All right, so I'm going to push each corner in directly on that corner, and it seems completely backwards, but really, that's the way to do it. Next, I'm going to turn my rocker to the side and push in the middle of each flat edge. Just the middle. Okay. Next step, start at a corner any corner. You want to start at the corner, push in and roll towards the middle. Again, start at the corner directly underneath, at the corner, push in, roll towards the middle of that edge. Okay? Flip it 180, because we still want to keep the north, south, east, west mentality for pushing in these bezels. Start at that corner, push toward the middle. Again, corner, roll it to that middle. Corner, roll it, corner, roll it. And then the last one, corner, roll it, corner, roll it. That's it. And you can go back and redo if you want, but always remember, start at that corner and go away from that corner, not toward it. If you go toward that corner, that's when you are going to get that bezel folding up on each other, and it's going to buckle and have a fold, and it just doesn't look nice. Next, I'm going to take this thing, push down that edge over top. Since this is a boulder opal that has, it doesn't have much of a curve to the top of it, even though it is a cabochon, it is very, very flat on the top. So we do need to push that bezel over onto the top. And I just make sure mine is nice and polished. My bezel pusher, I mean. Nice and polished, so it will just glide over the top of that bezel edge and not nick up my gemstone at all. Because when you nick an opal, you know it. You hear that ghastly cracking noise, and then you know that's it. That stone is toast, unless you can polish it out, and unless you do lapidary work, it's tough to do. All right, that's it. Now for my own finishing, I would go in and I would finish it up a bit more. Just make sure it's pushed down nice and even all the way around. Then go in with my silicone polishing wheels and follow up with my 3M bristle discs, and then you'll have a finished piece. Well, thank you for joining me today, and I hope this helped you out with learning how to set bezels with corners and gemstones with corners. Give one a try. Start out with something like an agate or onyx or a quartz, something sturdy that is also inexpensive for your first few. That way it's not heartbreak if something happens to it, and just give it a go. Okay? Please let me know if you have any questions down at the bottom. I will answer them as best to my ability. If you like this video, awesome. Please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more content from me in the future, if you have any suggestions for content from me in the future, please let me know. Subscribe and hit that notification bell. The next time I post a video, you'll know about it. Thanks so much. Bye.